Roger, LF. Understand you are on the bottom. The words crackle across a support ship floating on the surface of the Pacific Ocean, 11 kilometers above a submersible pilot who has just become one of the only human beings in history to touch the deepest point on Earth. Congratulations, Victor. Well done. Beginning exploration of the bottom. It sounds routine, almost bureaucratic, the kind of exchange you'd expect between a pilot and ground control. But what happens in the next few minutes will unravel more than 50 years of scientific certainty about what can and cannot survive at the edge of existence. Because at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the pressure crushing against every square inch of the hull exceeds 1,000 times what your body feels right now, at sea level, reading the sentence. The water hovers just above freezing. No sunlight has touched these depths in hundreds of millions of years. By every rule of biology, scientists understood for most of the 20th century, nothing complex should be alive down there. And yet, the cameras kept rolling, and what they captured did not just surprise the researchers watching the feed. It forced an entire field to rewrite its most basic assumptions about where life can exist and what life actually needs in order to survive. The most unsettling part isn't what you might expect. It wasn't a monstrous creature lurking in the silt or some alien organism unlike anything on the surface. It was something far more familiar and far more disturbing because of exactly how familiar it was. So what is actually living at the deepest point on our planet, nearly 7 miles beneath the waves? And why did it take humanity a century and a half of trying before we finally found out? To understand how strange this discovery really is, you have to understand where we're talking about. The Mariana Trench cuts across the western Pacific Ocean, roughly 200 kilometers east of the Mariana Islands near Guam. It isn't a single canyon carved into the seafloor. It's a crescent-shaped scar nearly 2,500 kilometers long, stretching farther than the distance from New York to Denver, entirely hidden beneath the ocean's surface. That scar exists because the Pacific tectonic plate is being forced downward, or subducted, beneath the smaller Mariana Plate, in one of the slowest, most powerful geological collisions happening anywhere on Earth. This process has been quietly reshaping the seafloor here for tens of millions of years, grinding rock into the mantle at a pace of just a few centimeters annually. And in doing so, it has carved out the single deepest known point in any ocean on the planet. That point is called Challenger Deep, and at its lowest measured spot, the seafloor drops to somewhere around 10,900 meters, or nearly 35 to 800 feet below the surface. To make that number mean something, imagine taking Mount Everest, the tallest mountain above sea level on Earth, and dropping it straight down into Challenger Deep. Its summit would still sit more than a mile beneath the surrounding ocean surface. The scale is almost impossible to picture, which is exactly why it took so long for anyone to even attempt to measure it. The first real measurement came in 1875 from the crew of the British survey ship HMS Challenger, using nothing more sophisticated than a hemp rope weighted with lead, a sounding technique that had barely changed since ancient Phoenician sailors first used similar methods to gauge harbor depths. They recorded a depth of approximately 8,184 meters. It was crude by today's standards, off by more than 2 kilometers from modern estimates, but it was humanity's first real glimpse into just how deep the ocean could go. What most people don't realize is that the Challenger expedition wasn't just a depth-sounding trip. It was one of the first truly systematic scientific surveys of the deep ocean ever undertaken. And over the course of its 4-year voyage, the crew cataloged more than 4,700 previously unknown species, effectively laying the foundation for the entire field of oceanography. The trench and the deepest point within it were later named in the ship's honor. Modern multi-beam sonar has since refined that original estimate considerably, though even now scientists disagree on the exact figure, with different survey teams reporting depths ranging anywhere from about 10,125 to 10,135 meters. That's not sloppy science. It's physics. Sound travels at different speeds depending on water temperature and salinity, and at extreme depths, even minor variations in those conditions can throw off acoustic readings by meaningful margins. So even with satellites, sonar, and decades of refinement, the precise depth of Challenger Deep remains, technically, an open question. What isn't in dispute is just how brutal the environment down there actually is. Scientists refer to this entire region, any part of the ocean below 6,000 meters, as the Hadal Zone, a term proposed in 1956 by the Danish oceanographer Anton Fredrik Brun, named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld. It's a fitting name. The Hadal Zone makes up less than 2% of the entire ocean floor by area, an almost negligible sliver of the planet's surface, yet its scientific significance turned out to be wildly disproportionate to its size. Down there, water temperature hovers between roughly 1 and 4 degrees Celsius year-round, with essentially no seasonal variation. Pressure at the deepest point exceeds 1,000 atmospheres, which translates to more than 8 tons of force pressing on every square inch of surface area. And it is dark. Not dim, not shadowy, but completely and permanently dark. a darkness that has never once been interrupted by a single photon of sunlight. Which raises the obvious question. With no light, no plants, no photosynthesis, and none of the food chains that power almost every ecosystem we're familiar with, how does anything survive down there at all? Part of the answer is something scientists call marine snow, a constant silent drift of organic debris sinking down from the sunlit layers of ocean far above. Dead plankton, animal waste, shed skin cells, and fragments of decomposing organisms slowly spiral downward through the water column in a journey that can take weeks. Along the way, bacteria consume the overwhelming majority of that material, so that by the time any particle actually reaches Hadal depths, less than 1% of its original organic content remains. It is, essentially, table scraps falling from a meal eaten miles above. Occasionally, something bigger interrupts that trickle. A whale carcass sinks to the bottom, an event researchers call a whale fall, and it triggers a temporary explosion of biological activity in the surrounding area. A single large whale carcass can sustain an entire deep-sea community for decades, passing through distinct ecological stages as different waves of scavengers, then specialists, then bone-eating worms move in to consume it down to nothing. These events are rare, unpredictable, and can go unnoticed for years, but their impact on the surrounding ecosystem is enormous. Based on all of this, the prevailing scientific consensus through most of the 20th century was straightforward and, on paper, entirely logical. The Mariana Trench should be close to a biological desert, sparse, isolated, barely clinging to life. The problem with that theory was that almost nobody had actually gone down to check. That changed on January 23, 1960, when Swiss engineer Jacques Picard and U.S. Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh climbed into a spherical steel pressure cabin bolted beneath a gasoline-filled float known as the bathyscaphe Trieste. Their mission was as simple as it was audacious: reach the deepest point on Earth, a feat no human had ever attempted. The engineering behind Trieste was remarkable for its time. The pressure sphere that Picard and Walsh sat inside was forged from steel more than 12 centimeters thick, built to withstand crushing forces that would flatten almost any conventional structure. It was designed by Swiss physicist Auguste Piccard, Jacques' father, a man who had previously made his name pioneering high-altitude balloon flights into the stratosphere before turning his engineering talents in the exact opposite direction, toward the deepest place on the planet instead of the highest. The descent alone took nearly 5 hours. As Trieste sank deeper into the trench, every additional 10 meters added another full atmosphere of pressure onto the hull. At around 9,000 meters, one of the outer plexiglass window panes cracked with a loud, concussive bang that rattled through the cabin, a moment that must have felt like the end of the mission, or worse. The inner pressure hull held, and the descent continued. At 1:06 in the afternoon local time, Trieste touched down on the floor of Challenger Deep, reaching a depth of approximately 10,916 meters, a record that would stand unbroken for more than 50 years. But the instant the craft landed, it kicked up a cloud of fine silt from the seafloor, and with almost no current to clear it away, visibility collapsed to nearly zero within moments. Picard and Walsh spent only about 20 minutes on the bottom before beginning their long ascent back to the surface. In that brief window, they reported seeing something that generated scientific debate for decades afterward: a flat, fish-like creature moving near the seafloor. At the time, the very idea of complex vertebrate life surviving at that depth seemed almost impossible, so the sighting was treated with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. Later researchers suggested it may have actually been a sea cucumber or some other invertebrate misidentified in the near-zero visibility. To this day, nobody knows for certain what they actually saw. Astonishingly, no human being returned to Challenger Deep for the next 52 years. During that long gap, robotic vehicles tried to pick up where Trieste left off. Japan's Kaiko, a remotely operated vehicle, reached the bottom in 1995 and successfully collected sediment samples and imagery before being lost in 2003 when severe weather snapped its tether cable during a typhoon. The American hybrid vehicle, Nereus, reached Challenger Deep in 2009, only to be destroyed in 2014 while exploring the Kermadec Trench near New Zealand, imploding catastrophically under pressure it simply could not withstand. Each loss was a stark reminder that even machines purpose-built for the abyss were operating right at the edge of what engineering could survive. The solution that finally broke the deadlock turned out to be far simpler and far cheaper than anyone expected. In the early 2000s, marine biologist Dr. Alan Jameson and his research team, working out of the Ocean Lab at the University of Aberdeen, developed a new approach to studying the trench. Instead of relying on expensive, crude submersibles or fragile tethered robots, they built autonomous landers, essentially steel frames rigged with high-definition cameras, powerful LED lights, depth sensors, and bait. These landers were dropped straight to the seafloor on a weighted line, left to sit and film for hours or even days at a time, and then released to rise back to the surface automatically once triggered by an acoustic signal. The footage these unassuming steel frames brought back overturned decades of assumptions in a matter of months. Within minutes of the cameras reaching bottom, movement began appearing out of the darkness, then more, then dozens, then hundreds. Swarms of amphipods, shrimp-like crustaceans, converged on the bait from every direction imaginable. Amphipods are common throughout the world's oceans, but the ones found in the trench were something else entirely. Some individuals measured over 30 centimeters in length, roughly 10 times larger than their shallow water relatives. This phenomenon, known as deep-sea gigantism, is thought to result from a combination of cold temperatures, slowing metabolism, higher oxygen availability at depth, and reduced predation pressure, all of which allow certain species to grow far older and far larger than they ever could closer to the surface. Similar gigantism has since been documented in other deep-sea invertebrates, including giant isopods and colossal squid. The amphipods navigated the total darkness using an extraordinarily sensitive form of chemoreception, essentially a sense of smell capable of detecting food across distances that seemed almost impossible, given the crushing pressure they lived under. They competed aggressively over the bait, stripping fish carcasses down to bone within hours. To the researchers watching the footage back on the surface, this wasn't the behavior of a few desperate scavengers barely clinging to survival. This was a thriving, socially organized population going about its business. And the amphipods, it turned out, were only the warm-up act. For decades, the scientific consensus held that fish simply could not survive below roughly 8,200 meters. That limit wasn't a guess. It was grounded in fundamental biochemistry. At extreme pressure, a molecule called trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMAO, helps stabilize protein structures inside marine fish, counteracting the way pressure distorts and destabilizes proteins at a cellular level. The catch was that TMAO itself becomes destabilizing at very high concentrations, effectively creating a hard ceiling on how deep a fish could physically live. Then, in 2014, one of Dr. Jameson's landers filmed a small, pale, translucent fish swimming calmly at 8,145 meters in the Mariana Trench. It wasn't struggling. It wasn't hiding. It moved with the relaxed, unbothered confidence of an animal that belonged exactly where it was. It was later identified as a new species of snailfish, part of the family Liparidae, a group already known to live at moderate depths, but never before documented anywhere close to this extreme. In 2017, the species was formally described and named Pseudoliparis swirei, in honor of Herbert Swire, a navigator aboard the original HMS Challenger expedition who kept meticulously detailed journals throughout the voyage. At the time of its naming, it was the deepest dwelling fish ever formally described by science. Marine scientist Dr. Mackenzie Geringer, working at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, later studied the biochemistry of these Hadal snailfish in detail, and her research confirmed something remarkable. Pseudoliparis swirei carries extraordinarily high concentrations of TMAO, higher than any fish ever previously measured, high enough that it appears to tip the balance back in favor of protein stability, even under crushing pressure. In other words, the fish had evolved to use the very molecule that was supposed to impose a hard depth limit as the key to breaking straight through it. Subsequent analysis revealed even more adaptations layered on top of that one. The fish's bones are softer and less mineralized than those of surface-dwelling species. So rather than shattering under pressure, its skeleton simply flexes. Its cell membranes contain a higher proportion of unsaturated fatty acids, which stay fluid and flexible under conditions that would lock a stiffer membrane rigid. A genome sequencing study of the species, published in 2019, found that it had lost a significant portion of its olfactory receptor genes, a meaningful evolutionary trade-off, given that smell is essentially useless in total darkness. Taken together, the genome itself appeared to have been progressively streamlined over evolutionary time, stripping away anything unnecessary and reinforcing everything required for survival at the absolute edge of what a vertebrate body can withstand. In 2022, a joint Australian-Japanese expedition aboard the research vessel DSSV Pressure Drop filmed a juvenile snailfish of the same genus at 8,336 meters in the Izu Ogasawara Trench off the coast of Japan, a trench that runs warmer than the Mariana and sits beneath more biologically productive surface waters, meaning more organic material reaches its floor. During that same expedition, researchers physically retrieved 2 specimens of a related species, Pseudoliparis believi, from 8,022 meters in the neighboring Japan Trench, marking the first time in history that any fish had ever been physically captured from below 8,000 meters. Afterward, Dr. Jameson noted that this depth likely represents close to the true biological ceiling for vertebrate life, and that any future depth record would probably only be broken by a handful of meters at most. But below the point where fish can survive, The trench still had another 2 full kilometers of depth left before reaching its actual floor. And what researchers eventually found down there turned out to be something else entirely. The floor of Challenger Deep is not the barren wasteland scientists once assumed. It's simply strange in ways nobody had anticipated. Scattered across the soft sediment are xenophyophores, single-celled organisms that can grow to nearly 20 centimeters across, making them among the largest individual cells known anywhere in science. The name comes from Greek, meaning bearer of foreign bodies, a reference to how these organisms construct their shells out of sediment particles, fragments of other organisms, and mineral debris gathered from the surrounding seafloor. They were first described back in 1889, but remained poorly understood for most of the following century. A 2020 study led by Lisa Levin at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography found that these strange, oversized cells actually function as fish nurseries, with juvenile fish of multiple species sheltering inside their porous mineral shells, using the microarchitecture of a single cell the way shallow water fish use a coral reef. Sea cucumbers, formerly known as holothurians, move slowly across the sediment nearby, consuming it wholesale to extract whatever fragments of organic material manage to survive the long descent from above. And certain species have been recorded in the trench at population densities far higher than on the surrounding abyssal plain, which lacks the funnel-like topography that concentrates food into the trench itself. Sharing that sediment are amphipods of the species Hirundellea gigas, small crustaceans that have evolved a unique enzyme allowing them to digest cellulose, meaning they can break down sunken wood and woody debris at depths where no other known animal has developed that capability. Remarkably, their digestive chemistry actually functions more efficiently under roughly 100 megapascals of hydrostatic pressure than it does at surface conditions, an enzyme that isn't just tolerating the crushing environment, but has been optimized specifically because of it. That funneling effect turns out to be one of the most important ecological insights to emerge from recent surveys. The V-shape of Hadal trenches isn't just a geological curiosity, it functions as a food concentrating mechanism. Organic particles that settle across a huge area of open ocean above get funneled by gravity and the trench's steep walls down toward its deepest point. A 2019 study led by researchers at Tokyo University of Marine Science and Technology found that Hadal trenches can accumulate organic carbon at rates up to 10 times higher than the surrounding abyssal plains. Rather than being a biological desert, the Mariana Trench may actually function as a kind of organic sink, a natural collection point for nutrients drifting down from above. And in some parts of the trench, organisms don't even wait for food to fall from the surface at all. Where cracks in the seafloor allow hydrogen sulfide, methane, and other reduced chemicals to seep upward from deep within the earth, chemosynthetic bacteria build entire food webs completely from scratch, with no sunlight required whatsoever. The discovery of hydrothermal vent communities in 1977, made by the Woods Hole submersible Alvin near the Galapagos Rift, was the first proof scientists ever had that photosynthesis wasn't a universal requirement for life on Earth. Similar chemosynthetic ecosystems have since been found at cold seeps, areas where methane-rich fluid leaks slowly from the ocean floor, supporting entirely separate microbial communities. Taken together, the picture that has emerged through years of cumulative expeditions isn't one of isolated survivors clinging desperately to existence in a hostile void. It's a fully functioning, layered, interconnected ecosystem, precisely adapted to conditions that human technology can barely tolerate for even a few hours at a time. 52 years after Trieste's historic descent, a human being finally returned to Challenger Deep alone. On March 26, 2012, filmmaker and ocean explorer James Cameron completed the first solo crew dive to the bottom of the Mariana Trench aboard the Deep-Sea Challenger, a vertical descent vehicle he had spent 7 years developing alongside engineers in Australia. The craft was designed to sink nose first and ascend nose first, using its narrow profile to minimize water resistance and speed up both the descent and the return trip. Its science bay was packed with sample collection tools, sediment cores, and high-definition 3D cameras designed to document the seafloor in detail no one had ever captured before. Cameron spent roughly 3 hours on the bottom before a hydraulic leak in the vehicle's thruster system forced him to cut the dive short and begin an early ascent. The footage he brought back showed a flat, almost featureless landscape of soft sediment dotted with small amphipods drifting through the frame and pale bacterial mats coating patches of the seafloor. He later described the scene as desolate and said the loneliness he felt down there was greater than anything he had experienced even while filming outer space simulations for his movies. 7 years later, retired naval officer and explorer Victor Vescovo descended to 10,928 meters aboard the Limiting Factor, a titanium-hulled, full ocean-depth submersible built by Triton submarines, setting a new world record for the deepest crewed dive in history. Vescovo spent nearly 4 hours on the seafloor across multiple separate dives as part of the Five Deeps expedition, an ambitious project aimed at reaching the deepest point in each of the world's 5 oceans. His dives produced the highest resolution multi-beam sonar maps of Challenger Deep ever created, and what he and his science team found on the seafloor was remarkable in two very different directions. Biologically, the cameras captured translucent animals that scientists couldn't immediately identify, several of which appeared to represent entirely unknown species. Pink holothurians moved slowly across the sediment. Amphipod swarms approached the vessel out of the darkness. The seafloor showed clear signs of biological activity in every direction the cameras pointed, but something else was down there too. Resting on the sediment, at nearly 11 kilometers below the surface, was a plastic shopping bag. Nearby lay candy wrappers and fragments of plastic packaging. The single deepest, most remote point on the entire planet, a place that requires extraordinary engineering and resources just to reach once, had already been visited by our garbage. The implications hit almost immediately. A follow-up study led by Dr. Jameson, published in Royal Society Open Science in 2019, examined amphipods collected from 6 deep Pacific trenches, including the Mariana. Every single sample contained microplastics. In some cases, the levels of persistent organic pollutants found inside the amphipod tissue exceeded concentrations, measured in crabs, pulled from some of the most heavily contaminated rivers in China. The animals living in what should be Earth's most untouched, most remote ecosystem had somehow accumulated some of the highest concentrations of a certain industrial chemicals ever recorded in any marine crustacean anywhere on the planet. The mechanism driving this is the exact same one that concentrates food in the trench in the first place. Ocean currents that funnel organic material downward also carry microplastics and chemical pollutants right along with it. The trench's geometry, built over millions of years to concentrate nutrients, concentrates everything else we've been releasing into the ocean for the last century as well. Beyond the trench itself, the Mariana is no longer viewed by scientists as a dead end or a biological curiosity to be checked off a list. It has become something closer to a lens, a way of learning to see life itself differently. Nobody thought the ocean could be this deep, and once it was, an entirely new set of questions opened up about what could possibly live down there and why. Researchers studying enzymes produced by Hadal bacteria are now exploring applications ranging from pharmaceutical development to industrial processes that require chemical stability under extreme heat, cold, or pressure. DNA polymerases originally isolated from deep-sea organisms have already found major uses in molecular biology laboratories around the world. Further discoveries from Hadal microbes may eventually yield compounds with properties scientists haven't even begun to anticipate. The most far-reaching implication, though, reaches well beyond Earth entirely. Europa, the 4th largest moon of Jupiter, is believed to harbor a liquid water ocean beneath a shell of ice estimated to be somewhere between 10 and 30 kilometers thick. Scientists at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory estimate that this hidden ocean may contain roughly twice the total volume of every ocean on Earth combined. Europa's subsurface ocean is thought to be in direct contact with a rocky seafloor, which could allow for hydrothermal activity strikingly similar to what powers chemosynthetic ecosystems here on Earth. No sunlight reaches it, the exact chemistry remains uncertain, but the underlying conditions aren't categorically different from what exists in the Hadal zone of our own planet. Enceladus, a moon of Saturn, actively vents material from its own subsurface ocean through cracks near its icy south pole. The Cassini spacecraft, which orbited Saturn between 2004 and 2017, flew directly through these plumes and detected water vapor, molecular hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and complex organic molecules, a chemical signature consistent with hydrothermal activity happening beneath the ice. Molecular hydrogen in particular matters here because it's the same energy source used by many chemosynthetic bacteria on Earth, the very organisms building entire food webs in total darkness at the bottom of the Mariana Trench right now. The connection between this trench and these distant icy moons isn't just a poetic comparison. It's biochemical and physical. Every single time a new organism is discovered surviving at Hadal depths without a single photon of sunlight, it widens the realistic probability that life could exist in lightless subsurface oceans elsewhere in our solar system. Astrobiologists at both NASA and the European Space Agency have explicitly cited Hadal ecology as a working framework for designing instruments intended to search for life on these icy moons. And yet, more than 80% of Earth's Hadal trenches remain almost entirely unexplored. The New Britain Trench, the South Sandwich Trench, the Puerto Rico Trench, each one represents a largely unknown biological world sitting quietly beneath the waves, waiting for its own version of Dr. Jameson's landers to finally arrive. Even the Mariana Trench itself, the most studied Hadal environment on the planet, is nowhere near fully mapped. The most detailed surveys to date cover only fragments of Challenger Deep. The trench walls, the intermediate depths, the full chemistry of the sediment, all of it remains incompletely understood, even after more than a century and a half of trying. What began as a blank space on the map, a place so extreme that no one could even reach it, has quietly become one of the most scientifically productive environments on the entire planet. a place where biology has found working answers to problems that physics once insisted couldn't be solved at all, where ecosystems have been quietly building themselves in total darkness for hundreds of millions of years without any human ever knowing they were there, and where, disturbingly, the evidence of human impact has arrived faster than our understanding of what exactly we're affecting. The greatest discoveries waiting in the Hadal Zone may not have even happened yet. And when they finally do, they may end up telling us something not just about the ocean floor 11 kilometers beneath our feet, but about what might be quietly alive right now in the oceans of distant, icy worlds, waiting in the dark for someone, anyone, to finally come and look.